slave.
But this is 1990 before we go to the phones, Minister Farrakhan. In the 60s, in the 70s, we had what could be called a revolution of sorts. In the 50s, we had the writings of Malcolm X. We had the emergence of the Honorable Minister Elijah Muhammad, who you followed. We had Dr. Martin Luther King. We had Stokely Carmichael yelling, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." We had organizations like the Urban League funding grants in communities to work on projects for self-esteem. You mean in 1990, we don't feel good about who we are? Why not?
Because, Sister Beverly, when Dr. King was assassinated and 100 cities went up in smoke, white folk began to study us. And they studied why we acted on one accord without any leader, no conspiracy. What brought this about? And they found that it was television. It was black programming, pardon me. It was like Black Journal, Black on Black. All of these black programs, Soul, were on television. And if you notice, since the late 60s and early 70s, every one of these black programs have been taken off the air, and the language has changed. We are no longer black and Hispanic. We are the minority, the underclass. You see? So we are relegated now to an inferior numerical status, an underclass, and these are code words to keep us from using the term black, which we rallied around in the 60s.
You're saying then it is deliberate. But then if it is
Absolutely.
deliberate, and there are those among us who are wise enough to see the signs, why isn't there some attempt? I mean, it isn't as if we don't know what the enemy is all about. We have studied the enemy, some of us, from our breast as we suckle them. So why is it we are buying into the plan?
You know, some of our leaders who, after the Civil Rights Bill of 64 and 65 and the Voting Rights Bill of, I think it's 66 or 67, many of our black intellectuals were so happy that we could go into places among white people that we never went before. We didn't pay attention to the critical era of writing our history. And so right while we were looking, Dr. King was distilled to one sentence, "I have a dream." Malcolm X was distilled to one phrase, "By any means necessary." And our history was being reversed, and now children are growing up in high schools in America feeling that we don't have anything to struggle for. We have already attained the promised land. Again, don't forget the counterintelligence program of J. Edgar Hoover, where that man and the government of the United States purposely set out to undermine, discredit, destroy black leaders, black organizations, and put us one against the other. And so in the 60s and 70s, we've seen the destruction of all of our black organizations, all of our black leaders, and unfortunately today, we only have two remaining national voices for the hurt of our people. One is Jesse Jackson, and the other is Louis Farrakhan. Now, these young people that you're talking about, who are cold and violent and brutal, that is the fruit that we have produced.
Then we're to blame.
I don't say we're to blame. I say it is the natural process when you and I have hoped for freedom and longed for freedom. You have to have a generation that is strong enough to fulfill that hope. So fulfillment doesn't look like hope. And this generation is violent because we live in a violent time. This generation rejects the education because the education is unfit for them.
Right,
they
let me
reject
stop you.
religion, they reject their parents, because God does not want this generation feeding from the same garbage that we have been fed and that we are trying to feed them.
I have a problem with that because education, as I've said many times, has never been directed at us. Yet we survived and we were educated without turning on each other. We didn't have programs, but we fed each other, we clothed each other, we were able to stick with each other when it was a much more fearful world in terms of our own individual safety. Walking across the street in a community that was predominantly white, for you as a black man, and lifting your head toward a white woman could get you killed, castrated. So now the young black man does not have that to be concerned about. He doesn't have that kind of fear. Why is he giving up everything that blacks before him fought so hard to do? Where is the missing link?
The missing link is the lack of continuity of knowledge that can continue the struggle. Those young men out there are the greatest generation that we have ever produced. But they're not going to listen to the sob story of mom or dad or teacher or preacher or politician. They're born to hear the word that Farrakhan is preaching from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Are you saying you're the only word out there? Earlier you said it was just you and Jesse Jackson. And then you said earlier also that there were lots of voices. Are you saying that the only real voices out there in the African American community is your voice and Jesse Jackson? Then what does that do to all the other leadership?
Well, look, sister, I'm telling you, if you walk with us through the ghetto, our children are not listening to anybody. They're not listening to Jesse. They're listening to Farrakhan. And that's what's happening in America today. It is true. There are many voices, but there's only one that black people are listening to. Why? Not because of the way I part my hair, but it's because of the message that I have that will affect black people positively.
What is your message? What do you say to us that hasn't been already said? Bear with me a moment.
Sure.
We've been told that we are inheritors of the thrones, kings and queens. We know our history, some of us. And when we have an opportunity to talk about it, we remind ourselves what we have been able to do under unbelievable conditions. So what do you say that will make us rise above what we already know and do something with ourselves, survive?
You've heard the message, and maybe you have internalized that message. One of the mistakes that we've made is we think that our children have heard that message, but our children have really not heard that message, and they're crying out for that message. And when that message is given to them, they respond. They are coming into the mosques literally by the hundreds. Literally by the hundreds.
Then let me stop you for a moment. Then that suggests then that you're the only place that they can go to hear the truth. Then you're saying that black leadership is a deficit, that the black press has not fulfilled their needs. Are you even saying that maybe the black church has not done what it's supposed to be if they're coming to you?
There's a combination of all of those things. The black press is possibly our greatest friend, but the black press is strapped financially. Black people do not support it. Black businesses don't advertise in it. Therefore, black newspapers don't have the wherewithal to send a reporter to actually get the facts. So the black press is actually the slave of the white press. Whatever comes over AP, UPI, and Reuters, that's what the black press prints. So the black media is stunted. The black church, in order to come into the 21st century, they have to preach a revived message. The black church has been the instrument that white folk have used to opiate, to make black folk acquiesce to white tutelage. Young people are not going to the church, they're running away from the church. And that's why I'm in all the major cities talking to the pastors, trying to help the pastors to revive that message, the true message of the gospel, so that together there won't be just one voice, Farrakhan, as a student of Elijah Muhammad, and all of those voices that come out from me, but all of us can speak with the same voice and be of one mind and lift our people together.
But there was a fire in the 60s, especially among young people. SNCC and the students were very active, angry, vocal, and yet We don't see much of that today. What happened?
In the 60s, Brother Gill, when you and I were young men, younger men, we were filled with the inspiration of Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X. And we were just a few days away from Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois, and we were enriched with something that this present generation is missing. When we were segregated, you know, in the South, we governed our own schools. We had our own motels, hotels, restaurants, bars. We had gas stations, bus companies, insurance companies. We were doing something and keeping some of our dollars revolving in our own community, allowing us then to build an economic base for ourselves. But when the enemy saw that the money was staying in that circle, and that money he wanted in his circle, then integration was offered to black people, not for us to really become the friends of white people, but this hypocritical friendship was to lead us away from self into their arms, because now we could sleep in the finest hotels, eat in the best restaurants, etc., etc. So our money left home, and now it's still doing the same thing. We get nearly $800 billion a year out of the American economy, but that money comes in, goes out. Very little stays among us. So when we got public accommodations bill, the right to vote, and it looked like we were going to reach the promised land, our people of that generation didn't teach the young the history of our struggle. When I spoke with Harry Belafonte, who is one of our noble heroes, Brother Harry told me that he spoke at Howard University. And he said the thing that saddened him is that the students at Howard did not know their recent history, much less the ancient history of our struggle. So if we don't know the struggle, then the struggle can't continue. And that's the difference, Brother Gill, with the Jewish community and our community. Because there's not one Jewish child that is unfamiliar with the Jewish struggle and the Jewish Holocaust. And that is why they can say, never again, and mean it, because they're so conscious and so sensitive to anti-Semitism that they will never let it happen again.
And so are you indicting the educative system in this country as being deficient in teaching our young men and women about their own history?
There is no question that there is a deliberate effort not only to dumb down our children, but to dumb down the American people. There was a program on television during the presidential election where Senator Kerry was running for the presidency of the United States. And they went into a high school and they showed a picture of Senator Kerry. And the white children didn't know who he was. And they showed them a picture of Russell Simmons. And all the white children knew Russell Simmons. Because the young whites today are involved in the hip-hop culture and generation, so they know all the artists, but they don't know their own politicians. And when in Europe, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were getting free of the Soviet Union, and they were on the news, the children did not know. They couldn't go to a map and point out where Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania was. But I knew that, Gil, from the 6th grade when I was a young student in Boston, Massachusetts. I had an education, Gil, and I went to an all-black grammar school and a white high school that was integrated. But when I left high school, I had 4 years of Latin, 2 years of German, 2 years of French, 1 year of Spanish. I had algebra, trigonometry, calculus. I had plane geometry, solid geometry. I had ancient history, medieval history, modern history. And I was 16 years of age. And I went south to school. And I never bought a book because I didn't need one. My high school education got me through college. Not today. We're suffering. Not only us, but the American people as a whole.